Now let's start with scene 1. Mr. Lamb's garden. There is the occasional sound of bird song and of tree leaves rustling. Jerry's footsteps are heard as he walks slowly and tentatively through the long grass. He pauses, then walks on again. He comes round a screen of bushes so that when Mr. Lamb speaks to him, he is close at hand and Derry is startled. So Derry, a 14-year-old boy, walks in slowly and cautiously into Mr. Lamb's garden, thinking that no one is around. Now Mr. Lamb's voice offering him the apple startles him, surprised him. Mr. Lamb introduces himself also and cautions Derry about the fruit, I'm coming to that had been blown down from the tree and it could cause him to trip. Now Mr. Lamb, mind the apples. Derry, what? Who is that? Who is there? Mr. Lamb, Lamb's my name. Mind the apples. Crab apples those are. Now Mr. Lamb said that mind the apples. And with that Derry got a start and utterly surprised. What? Who is that? Who is there? Now Mr. Lamb, Lamb's my name. Then Mr. Lamb introduced himself that his name was Mr. Lamb. And mind the apples, crab apples those are. Crab apples means wild beta apples blown down by wind. Wind falls in the long grass. You could trip. So Mr. Lamb cautioned him that he could trip. He could fall down or stumble. Derry, I thought this was an empty place. I didn't know there was anybody here. Now Derry was utterly surprised and he was very hesitant at this. Though Mr. Lamb welcomes him into the garden and says that his gate was always open to welcome people, but Derry tells that he had not expected anybody there. He thought that the place was totally empty. So Derry is frightened and turns to leave. Now come to the next page, page number 57. Mr. Lamb, that's all right. I'm here. What are you afraid of, boy? That's all right. Derry, I thought it was empty, an empty house. Derry repeatedly saying that he thought it was an empty house. That means he didn't want to show his face to anybody. So when Mr. Lamb was welcoming him, he didn't take it in a positive way. Mr. Lamb, so it is. Since I'm out here in the garden, it is empty until I go back inside. In the meantime, I'm out here and likely to stop. A day like this, beautiful day, not a day to be indoors. So Mr. Lamb wanted to infuse positivity from the very beginning. He said that, yes, I'm out here in the garden and it is empty. And until I go back inside, that means if I go back inside, then it will be empty. And in the meantime, I'm out here and likely to stop. A day like this, beautiful day. That means it's a beautiful day. We'll have to enjoy this day, not a day to be indoors. That means in this beautiful day, you should not remain indoors. You should come out and enjoy the day. Derry, with a panic, I've got to go. Mr. Lamb, no, not on my account. I don't mind who comes into the garden. The gate is always open. Only you climbed the garden wall. Now Derry became angry. Derry said, you were watching me. Now Derry is angry and says that he had come to steal anything. He had not come to steal anything. He merely wanted to get into the garden. Now Mr. Lamb says that only the young boys come to steal the apples. And he had noticed that Derry had climbed the garden wall, but the gate was always open for everybody. But Derry, I had not come to steal anything. Mr. Lamb, no, the young lads still strum the apples. You are not so young. Strum the apples means steal the apples. Derry, I just wanted to come into the garden. Mr. Lamb. So you did. Here we are then. Then Mr. Lamb admitted, yes, you wanted to enter into the garden, and you did. So what's the problem? There's no problem for that, no matter for that. Dairy. You don't know who I am. Mr. Lamb. Yes, a boy, 13 or so. Dairy. 14. Then pause. But I've got to go now. Goodbye. Then Dairy said that he was 14-year-old and he wanted to go that time. Mr. Lamb says that only the young boys come to steal the apples, but Dairy was not too young. Dairy tries to leave, but Mr. Lamb tells him not to be afraid. But Dairy feels that he is not afraid of people, but it is people who are afraid of him because he had the ugliest face. People pretend to be sympathetic, but are actually afraid of him. Mr. Lamb, nothing to be afraid of, just a garden, just me. But I'm not. I'm not afraid. Pause. People are afraid of me. Mr. Lamb, why should that be? Dairy, everyone is. It doesn't matter who they are, or what they say, or how they look, how they pretend. I know, I can see. Dairy said, yes, everyone is afraid of me. It doesn't matter who they are, or what they say, or how they look, how they pretend, how they feign, how they seem. But I know, I can see. Mr. Lamb, see what? Dairy, what they think? They means other people think of him. Mr. Lamb, what do they think then? Dairy, you think here's a boy, you look at me, and then you see my face and you think, that's bad, that's a terrible thing, that's the ugliest thing I ever saw. You think poor boy, but I'm not poor. Underneath you're afraid. Anybody would be, I am. When I look in the mirror and see it, I'm afraid of me. So Dairy has developed a sort of inferiority complex for his burnt face. One side of his face was burned. So he has developed an inferiority complex. So always he thinks, and he is very pessimistic in nature. He has become very pessimistic in nature. He doesn't want to show his face to anybody else. And he always thinks everybody is looking at him and passes comment.